Hello, everyone. I'm Pastor Melvin Vinson with Higher Calling Church Ministries. We're located in Trotwood, Ohio at 2534 Shiloh Springs Road. Would love to have you come out and visit with us. This day, we're going to be looking at and talking about what to do when you shipwreck. This message was brought about because there were so many different things that are going on around us, particularly in our city. We know recently we had a tornado that it came and it caused a lot of tragedy. There are a lot of victims and many family members and friends have had some tragedies and different things that happened to them in this area. And then also, not long ago, we had an incident that took place in our Oregon district where many people were hurt in that situation also. And it's causing havoc and is really wrecking people's lives. So this message was brought about partly because of that. What to do when you shipwreck. Our key text is found in Acts 27, verse 39, and then Acts 28:10, and then Acts 28:3 through 7. You can just write those down if you have opportunity, a pencil and paper to take notes. I'll be going over these as I get into this particular message. And when we look at this, what we're going to be seeing, we're going to be looking at a man by the name of Paul. And Paul had some things that happened in his life, and he was talking to some people and they didn't listen to him very well. And so I'm going to give you some real detail about Paul and a shipwreck that he went through, the only one where he tells us in detail about what was going on and what was taking place. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 25, it says this: 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. And so during that course, Paul warned the centurion who had him in custody and the captain that the shipwreck was likely to happen. But you know what? They ignored him. And I think about as we were getting ready, and even near my home where I live at, on the news when this tornado was getting ready to come through, the news was giving warning about the tornado in the area. And so many times when we get warnings, we tend to ignore them. And so Paul warned the centurion that this storm was a possibility, a shipwreck was going to happen. And what we see is that the wind that they went through was called a nor'easter. And so there were crew and passengers, about 276, and they were blown 426 miles off course. And I think about even in our lives, when tornadoes or when different tragedies, different things come into our lives, they shipwreck us. And so our plans and our goals, you know what, they get thrown off course. And many of our dreams have been shipwrecked. And so Paul is going to give us a map, so to speak, of how to deal with it. Here Paul teaches us how to behave in the middle of a shipwreck. And there are 4 things to do to get past it or get over to the other side. Now, when we look at this, Paul's shipwreck was a literal one. Yours might be a moral shipwreck, or it might be a physical shipwreck, or something financial that's happened in your life. Maybe it's a bankruptcy, or maybe it may be a loss of a job, or a loss of a friend, or even the loss of your home. So I want to give you 4 things to do to survive your shipwreck and use it to move forward in your life. One of the things that I tell many people is that no matter what comes your way in life, keep moving forward. And it's not always easy. But when we look at Paul, the first thing I want you to do is keep a servant's heart. Keep a servant's heart. In Acts chapter 28 and verse 3, Paul gathered a pile of brushwood for the fire. And notice now, Paul had warned the centurion and he had warned the people that a shipwreck was going to happen, that was possible to happen. And so after this thing happened, Paul never said one time, if you had listened to me. He never said, this is all your fault. He never said, I told you so. What he did was, he did what he could do to help the situation. Many of you who have been going through, have went through the tornado, have went through different tragedies in your life, and people had gotten in your face and they said many things. This is your fault. If you had to listen on all of these different kinds of things, I want to tell you that doesn't make you feel good. It really makes you angry. But I want you, even in the middle of your difficulty, to keep a servant's heart. You know, he did what he could do to help in the situation. And I want to say this also to you. Don't expect the world to stop when you're hurting, because everybody is hurting in some way or another. Everyone is dealing with something. Nothing that happens to you is about you and them, but it's always about you and him. It's about you and your God. And we get examples of this from John chapter 13 and verse 3 through 4. When we look at Jesus, what did he do in situations? Well, he took a towel. You say he took a towel? Yeah. He took a towel right in the middle of his difficulties, right in the middle of people rubbing him the wrong way. He had Jews that hated him. He had Judas that was betraying him. And he had a family that was ashamed of him. And he had disciples that were around him that were arguing position, even though he had told them what he was going to have to go through. Have you ever been in a situation where you were going through different things and everybody was thinking more about themselves than they were thinking about you? Well, here's what Jesus did. He got a towel. Jesus here in the midst of a shipwreck. Here's supper. He's having supper. And right over while he's having this supper, here's Judas sitting right around the table right there with him. And he's deciding to betray him. And so Jesus gets up. He arises up from the table. And he said, I am among you as a servant. I am among you as a servant. You're going to get a better view of this here in just a little bit. You know, pride separates us from God, but humility and hard work, it draws us closer to him. There is a plant that grows, it's called a sisal plant in Mexico. And you make twine out of it. You get a strong twine from it. But it's grown in bad conditions. Rocky soil. And there were these folks that came from America, from Florida, and they saw it. And they said, you know what? We can make this in Florida and it will be a lot better because we've got better soil there. But they grew it, and they grew a lot of it. It had large leaves and they were very rich. But its leaves disintegrated in the process of making the twine because they were too soft. The struggle in the bad soil made that sisal strong in Mexico. The struggles that you're going through right now is going to make you stronger in the future. You keep pushing forward. You keep moving forward. And so the first thing is keep a servant's heart. And then the second thing I want you to look at is it shake off the attacks of the enemy. Began to shake off those attacks of the enemy. In Acts chapter 28 and verse 3 and 5, Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself onto his hand. But Paul shook the snake off into the fire, and he suffered no ill effects. When you are in a shipwreck, I want to tell you that's when the enemy is going to attack you. That's when all hell seems to want to break loose on you. But you're going to have to learn how to shake it off. You need to what? Shake it off. You know, there was Shakespeare, and he mentioned this about King Arthur. He said, a small thing can harm a wounded man. It doesn't take much to harm a man when he's already down. When you're already down, anything can come along and keep you down. And so I want us to begin to shake off this stuff that's coming at you. You might be getting bill collectors that are calling you. You might have friends that are turning their backs on you. You might have girlfriend, boyfriend, husband relationships, because when storms come in our lives, we begin to attack one another many times. Instead of focusing in on we're in this thing together, let's roll together and we're going to see it through to the end. We're going to rebuild. We're going to restore. We're going to go forward no matter what it looks like. We may not be able to run. We might be frightened and our knees might be shaking like cheap drugstore dice, but we're going to keep moving forward. You know, there was a mule and he fell into a dry well. I've mentioned this before. And he was down there screaming and bellowing and whining. And the farmer, he looked down there and he said, you know, nothing we can do, so we might as well just bury him there. And so he called for his neighbors so that they could have a funeral for this mule. And they began to shovel dirt down up on top of that mule. And that mule was down there while they were throwing that dirt up on him. He was screaming, he was yelling, and they kept on shoveling. Well, you know, that mule quit whining, and he quit screaming, he quit bellowing. And that farmer looked over to see what was going on. Maybe he was already covered up, maybe he was already done in, and he expected to see a grave. But instead of seeing a grave, you know what he saw? He saw that mule, that old mule standing there looking at him face to face. That mule shook it off, and he stood up on it. And until he could get out of that well, he kept shaking it off and packing it up underneath his feet. And that's what we're going to do. You say, Pastor, that's a hard thing to do. But you're going to have to make a choice that you're going to shake this thing off, and you're going to pack it on under your feet, and you're going to keep moving forward. You got to shake it off. What people think, what people say, who you are, it doesn't matter. In the middle of this shipwreck, you know who you are. You know whose you are. You begin to say who you are in Christ Jesus. If you don't know him, get to know him so that he can help you get through the storms of your life. He is a sure anchor. Well, I want us to look at number 3. Don't get your stuff mixed up with other people's stuff. I said, don't get your stuff mixed up with other people's stuff. People talk when you're shipwrecked. In Acts 28 verse 4, when the islanders saw the snake, that thing hanging on his arm, this deadly snake that could disguise itself like a stick, hanging there from Paul's hand, they said to each other, this man must be a murderer. For though he escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. Sometimes when you're going through, people just want to see how long it's going to take before you die, before you give up, before you throw in the towel. And they're watching you. They're waiting on you. The enemy's watching you, wanting you to give up, wanting you to turn your back on the things that you love the most. Maybe it's your wife, your husband, your kids. When trouble comes, difficulties come, many times we turn our back on the very thing that is our support mechanism. So here are these people, they're watching, and they whispered and they waited for him to die. And Paul just kept on serving. He just kept on doing what he was doing. He just kept on moving like everything was fine. He just came out of a storm. I mean, he had been shook. I mean, people were upset. It was a terrible storm. But when Paul shook it off and nothing happened, they changed their mind. In Acts verse 28 and verse 5 and 6, but Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up and suddenly fall dead. But after waiting for a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their mind and they said he was a god. I want to tell you something. People might talk about you for 1 minute and praise you the next. Sometimes people will say you can't do this and you can't do that, and they'll tell all their friends about it. But when you began to succeed and you began to move forward and you began to make it, they walk up to you, pat you on the back and tell you, I knew you were going to make it all the time. You ought to give God some praise because God says you're going to make it. So yes, people always have something to say when you're experiencing a shipwreck. They talked about Jesus, they will talk about you. People always have something to say, but don't get your stuff mixed up with their stuff. In other words, listen to God, not people when you're down. Listen to God, not people when you're down. When your situation is questionable and you don't know how you're going to make it, and you're laying there, you that are married, you're laying there husband and wife, and you know you're at the end of your rope. You ain't got no money. You don't know how you're going to make it. But you know what? You look over at your wife. You look at your husband. You say, I don't know how we're going to make it, but you know what? We're going to believe God that he's going to help us and he's going to bring us through this terrible situation that we're dealing with. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it's painful. Yes, we don't like looking at it. But I want to tell you, if God be for you, who can be against you? So don't measure your life by the wind of others' opinion. Do not measure your life by other people's opinion about you, because they don't know you. And I want to tell you, you've got to keep moving forward. I like this illustration here. It was about a football coach. And a friend of his saw a great article in the newspaper that this newspaper person had written. And so he called the coach, and he said, I want to read it to you. And you know what that coach told him? He said, no, He said, no. He said, because next week, if I lose Friday's game, that same reporter will trash me. I can't get my stuff mixed up with their stuff. The very people that praise you today may talk about you tomorrow. So do not get caught up with all the praises, with all the adorations. Don't get caught up with how did I do? What did that look like? You just do the best that you can do, and that's all that's required of you. Do the best that you can. Be the best cook, be the best mother, be the best father, be the best at what you do, and specialize. Some people want to be special. You just keep doing what you do and get the best at it. You will specialize in it, and it will draw people to you that will be a blessing in your life. Number 4, expect God to work through you to meet someone else's need in the midst of your shipwreck. Expect God to work through you. When this tornado hit, I want to tell you, I was never ever so proud of Montgomery County. People began to come together. People who had been divided. People who didn't like each other. But you know what? When tragedy hit, they began to come together and they said, what can I do? How can I help? Here you say, well, I don't have a lot of money, but you know what? I can pray for you. You know what? I don't have this, that, but I can make some chicken. I can cook some chicken. Whatever I can do, I will do it. Expect God to work through you to meet someone else's need in the midst of your shipwreck. Because there's always someone that is nearby who is worse off than you. There's always somebody that's worse off than you. In Acts 28, verse 7 through 9, there was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, the chief official of the island. His father was sick, and he was in the bed suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him, and after prayer, laid hands on him and healed him. And when this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and they were healed. Wherever you are, whatever it is that you're in need of, maybe you're in need of love, maybe you're in need of money, maybe you're in need of patience, trust, and sow what little that you have as a seed into someone else, and God will feed you from that seed. You say, I don't have much love on the inside of me. You take that tiny bit of love that you have and you begin to share it with somebody. And you know what? God will cause that little bit of love to grow. You take that little money that you've got and you begin to share it with somebody else. And God will begin to cause that money to come back to you also, good measure and pressed down. You take that patience where you have no patience. You say, patience, I have had no patience. You began to show patience with somebody else, and that will come back to you. Do you need love today? Do you need forgiveness? You know you need it because there is something on the inside of you that's craving it. Take that little bit and you put it in the ground as a seed, and then you will reap a harvest. Paul healed Publius' father, and guess what? In Acts 28 and verse 10, they honored us in many ways. And when we were ready to sail again, they furnished us with the supplies that we needed. I want to tell you in conclusion of this particular message that sometimes God lets us shipwreck so that he can get us ready for a miracle. I want to say to you, don't give up. Don't give up. You're on the brink of a miracle if you don't give up. And don't miss the opportunity that God has tucked into your extremities. Paul left his shipwreck with new supplies, with a new ship, and moved into a new dimension. He moved into Rome. I want to say that if God has you on some island, some Malta, and the peace of your past security, you don't have nothing more than firewood there. There's a reason. He has you right where you need to be. So remember, number 1, keep your service heart. Don't let pride or anger in. Do not let pride or anger in. Number 2, shake off the attacks of the enemy. Don't just scream and whine and shake the dirt off and then stand up on it. Number 3, don't get your stuff mixed up with other people's stuff. And number 4, find someone worse off and sow into them. And God will use that seed to bring you to your next level. This is Pastor Melvin Vincent. I want to invite you to come and join us on Sunday mornings at 11:30 at Higher Calling Church Ministries. We're located at 2534 Shiloh Springs Road in Trotwood, Ohio, in the Chenault Dance Studio. Friday nights at 7 p.m. we have prayer and Bible study. Would love to have you there. Come and help us to grow and reach the world for the glory of God. Sunday mornings at 11:30 we start our worship morning service. God bless you until we see you again, in Jesus' mighty name.